Hey everyone, this is Alex here. So it may come as no surprise to you that many of the things that I make or develop or reverse engineer end up falling flat on their face, wasting me time, money, effort, and everything else. But there are those rare exceptions where I actually manage to make something halfway useful, and not only that, even sometimes the techniques are adopted by the rest of the lab because they are, in fact, worth doing. And this is one of these times. You can recognize these objects in front of you as a bacterial culture spreader, your little spread stick for your agar plates, your inoculating loops, and these may be a bit more, mission specific, but these are actually circle cutters for leaf tissue and I suppose anything else you may want to cut holes out of. And all three of these are made of reusable, autoclavable, bakeable materials so that you can essentially make batches of these, autoclave them, bake them, and keep reusing them. So this has the advantage of saving money and saving plastic that otherwise goes into waste. You may recognize this as a disposable inoculating loop. And you use these once, and what's nice is that when you take them out of the package, you can be reasonably sure that they're not contaminated with everything, but then you throw them out. And depending on your locality, they either get incinerated or they get thrown in the municipal garbage after autoclaving. So the fate for this good virgin plastic is often just in landfill, and anything that we can do as scientists to reduce that is, I think, a good thing. And what I will show you is not only how to make reusable spreaders, inoculating loops, and hole cutters, I will also give you a system for safely decontaminating these, baking them, and reusing them. And all in, this will actually cost you less than a box of, a case of these disposable units, and they'll last you time after time after time. So let's get started. We'll start with making these spread sticks, and we'll just go over how to make them. Then we'll go through the loops, and then finally the circle cutters. Okay, so the good old spread stick. When I first started in the lab, one of the things that my supervisor made me do was make these glass spreading sticks. And you know what? They're, I would say, relatively easy to make. You get a rod of borosilicate glass, you cut it into sections, and then you use a Bunsen burner to actually melt these joints and let gravity sort of bend these stir sticks however you like. They're nice because they're, perfectly smooth. You can sort of smooth the ends with the heat, and they work quite well. However, as a long-term solution, over time with some rough handling, even partially my fault, these can break, and as you can imagine, sharp, stabby bits of glass laying around isn't the best idea. So we won't be doing that today, but it is an option if all you have is borosilicate rod. The material that I've settled upon for spreading sticks, the optimal material anyway, is stainless steel. And the reason is it's easy to shape. You can buy it in bulk very cheaply. So, a stack of 25 of the stainless steel 2mm axle rod, which we'll be using today, is only, a few bucks. It's really insignificant compared to how many times you'll be able to reuse these over and over. I've tried thicker stainless steel. This is 3mm stainless steel, and I would say it's also useful. It's a little bit harder to shape, but it's got a bit more weight to it, and that sort of helps with spreading. But I managed to find some 2mm stuff, and I'm quite enjoying it. So that's what we'll be using today. If you're tempted, do not use titanium. at least for the spreading sticks. Titanium is nice because it's heat and chemical resistant. I would say more so than stainless steel. However, and I don't know if you can see this, but most of the time on titanium rod, the finish is very rough. This titanium oxide is like a matte finish, and you can feel that it's, a slightly almost abrasive finish. And unless you spend the time and you take it off with a bit of sandpaper, these just prove too laborious to actually shape into a nice, shiny, smooth spread stick. So I did try titanium, if you guys were wondering. No good for at least this purpose. But what you're going to want to do is go on eBay and look for 2mm stainless steel axle rod. I guess it's popular in the radio-controlled car and helicopter community, but we can repurpose it for our purposes and making them into spread sticks. So it'll come in a bunch like this, and depending on the quality, you know it's good quality when the ends of the rods, let's see if I can get that, are actually, they're cut perpendicular. They're cut nicely, and they're not sort of chewed up at the ends where they sort of snipped it off. It looks like they went to some effort to actually grind it flat, which is nice. However, you can't get started right away because there's no bevel on the ends of these rods. What will happen is once you shape them into the spreading stick shape, when you actually drag it across the agar, if there's any sort of sharp bits on the end here, what'll happen is you'll actually dig into your agar and make a cut in your agar, which doesn't look nice, and could introduce another hanging variable in your experiment. So first thing we want to do when we get these rods is actually put a bevel onto these rods, and I'm going to show you how right now. Okay, so this setup may look a little bit sketchy, but let me tell you what's going on. Here I have a nice sort of Irwin clamp-on vise, which you can attach to a sturdy workbench, and it's really useful around the lab in the sense that it can help hold stuff very steadily, assuming that your bench is sturdy by itself. And what we have here is an old, crusty bastard file. Don't go into, your mom's or dad's or grandpappy's collection of vintage files and use theirs. Either get something cheap off Kijiji or something like that, but it's in lieu of a grinding wheel. What we're going to use is a drill and a bastard file. And I mean, I do have a grinding wheel in another location. However, you really want to have the conversation with your supervisor only once, which goes, Alex, why is there abrasive grinding dust over everything? You only want to have that conversation once with your supervisor, okay? Just heads up. So what you're going to do, you're going to take the bastard file, clamp it up nice and firm in your vise. It's clamped nice and firmly to the table, and then what you're going to want to do is chuck up your You're going to want to chuck up your rod in one end into the drill. And then what you're going to do, and let me see if I can do this on camera. What you're essentially going to do is you're going to spin the drill, and you're going to press the rod against the bastard file, or honestly, whatever abrasive substrate that you can use that you don't mind messing up. Like this is an old Lansky abrasive sort of pad, and I use that too. It's a little bit messier, but we're just going to grind that bevel onto here onto this rod. So here we go real quick. Okay, so now you know why we don't wear gloves while doing this. Okay, just to give everyone a before picture, the rod before is in pretty good shape. However, we need to take off those edges and make that bevel. So let's try this again without gloves. Somewhere there's a machinist out there crying over my poor file, but that's okay. They're born in factories every day. So I don't know if you can see that too clearly. It's sort of hard to focus, but now we've gotten rid of those sharp edges on the end and we have a nice bevel. Now, before you do the other end, decide which end is actually going to form the spreading part, and then take some, fairly fine sandpaper, or very fine, and just smooth the end, get rid of any sorts of oxides and we just want to make it pretty. So make about, 15, 20, 25, or even 100 of these at a time. Prepare them the same way. Take off the edges so that they're, so that they don't cut into agar. Smooth the business ends, and it's better to do as many as you can at a time because we'll be using them in bulk, we'll be decontaminating them in bulk and baking them in bulk. So there's an economy of scale if you have, 100 of these at a time. It's much more worth your time if you make many and many and many of these, okay? So make as many as you are willing to do in one batch, and let's continue to the next step. So, like your first pancake in the morning, your first spread stick is essentially just practice and may resemble something like surrealist art. However, it'll serve as the foundation, as the guide for the rest of your sticks. So, in your head, have a rough design of what you want your spread stick to look like, and then you're going to want to take your vise and start bending. So, essentially, the more upright, the more perpendicular to the jaws of the vise that you make your bends, the more flat the stick is going to be. And you may want to shape it by hand to have a bit of a curve in the handle, but I'll leave that up to you. So clamp it up and start bending however you like. Some people like a little hook at the end, but personally I find that can catch on things, so we'll actually drop it down a little bit, maybe 5 centimeters, and make our first bend. Actually, maybe let's make that something like that. Okay, and just gonna bend it. We'll make it Alex style. Okay, got our first bend. And what's nice with 2mm rod versus 3mm is that you can actually shape it by hand without too much effort. So let's make our second bend. And I'm trying to do this on camera. I don't know how flat it will be. Also, this is coming out kind of huge, so you probably want to make a smaller one. So we'll make a small bend, 45 degrees. And then last bend, we'll make it, I don't know, let's say about there. Okay, so this one's a little bit large, but again, art is art, guys, and it's still going to be very functional, and now you can adjust it by hand if you like. But you've made your first spread stick, so now you want the rest of them to look, sort of more carefully made. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to take the other rods that you have, and you're actually going to measure and mark off where you're going to do the rest of the bends so that they're all consistent. So for example, if my first bend is here, I'm going to mark it with a Sharpie right there. My second bend is there, I'll mark it like that, and so on. So now that you've made your little guide rod, take all your other rods and line them up as best as you can. And I mean, you can imagine what we're going to do here. Just take your Sharpie and again, just sort of freehand where the rest of the bends are going to be. About there. Where's that last one? So that we used our first rod as the guide, and then the rest will bend to the same sort of dimensions, at least roughly. And there we have it. So I'm just going to go and make the rest of these. However, these are essentially ready to use. All that's left is to decontaminate them, package them, and bake them, which we'll cover at the end when we're done with all our other little bits. So the second item that we're making today are inoculation loops, and you can make all sorts of different sizes. You know, the commercial ones, they come in microliter sort of ratings, and what the rating really means is how much liquid can be held by sort of surface tension between this little circle. So this is, I think, a 50 microliter loop, and you know, I've probably made something closer to a 75 or 100 microliter loop. And the material that we use, or that I use, is 22 gauge titanium wire. Due to the popularization of sort of fancy metal blends for vaping coils, you know, that nicotine delivery system, they've sort of popularized and sort of made available a wire that's a little bit more exotic than we're used to. So you can get for very cheap a lot of titanium high quality wire, and that's what we're actually going to use to shape our inoculating loops. So first thing you want to do, kind of like the last the spread sticks, is you're going to want to make your first specimen, and a pair of side cutters are essential for this. Bad ones anyway, don't use your good ones. You're going to want to unravel a length of wire, and I'll leave sort of the length up to you. Honestly, I would say it's probably about 2 feet of wire. Okay, so once you have your coil of wire, arbitrarily I said, you know, 2 feet, but you can sort of play it by ear. Take a rod, this is just a stainless rod, and this is actually going to determine the inside diameter of your inoculating loop. So the bigger the rod, the bigger the loop is going to be. So take it and, you know, chuck a decent amount up, or rather fasten it in your vise like that. Okay. So once you have your wire, chuck up a piece of stainless steel in your vise that will determine the inside diameter of your inoculating loop. So the larger the rod, the larger the diameter of your loop is going to be. So take the 2 ends of the wire and chuck them into your drill as best as you can. It may seem a little bit janky, but it'll work, trust me. Sort of like that, okay? Then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to wrap your wire around the rod and apply a little bit of tension away from it. And then just slowly start spinning the drill, and you'll see exactly what happens. Here we go. Let the drill chuck go, and here we are. Let's take a look. And here we are. Take a look. Look how beautiful the winding is. Look how consistent the loop is. It's nice and circular. We've made it a little bit too long. but that's okay. What we're going to do is just cut off any sort of excess with our side cutters. And there we are. So same thing like the spreading sticks. Make sure you make a large batch of these because, again, the efficiency and the savings come when you're doing this in bulk. So the last item that we'll be making today are stainless steel circle hole cutters, and they're more difficult to find than you think. You know, there are hole punchers for leather and other types of crafts, but to actually find one that you can sterilize and reuse is actually quite difficult. So that's right up my alley. I've made my own. And if we want to take even portions of the leaf and ensure that they're the same weight every time, we can use the circle cutter. Okay, I think that's the best picture we're going to get. So essentially these hole cutters have an inside bevel which allow them to cut the leaf. So let me just demonstrate. Okay, there's your leaf, and then you just pop it out into your tube. Boop. And as you can see, they're all nicely the same size. And let's say you were doing a Gus infiltration assay, or an RNA extraction, it's useful to have similar sized pieces. So how do we actually make these? It took a couple of tries to figure out how to actually do it properly without deforming the metal, and I'll show you how in a sec. But the material that we're using is actually old used stainless steel tubing from HPLCs and sort of high pressure equipment, and if you ask your chemist friends nicely, I'm sure they have buckets of these that they will pay you to take away. Okay, so you can get these often for free, just offcuts from HPLC equipment. So get yourself some of this, get a nice pipe cutter, and cut yourself a couple of lengths of pipe. And when you cut them, you'll see that the metal is pretty thin, so it actually deforms inward, but that's okay. We're going to take care of that in just 1 second. Now, the other tool you'll need is one of these step drills, and they're very inexpensive, maybe 15 bucks for a set of 3. And what you actually want to do is you want to make sure you get the type that is stepped, sure, but between the steps there's actually a 45-degree angle. So something like that. You want to make sure that the step drill that you get has these sort of 45-degree sections, because if you've been following along, you can guess. What we're going to do is we're going to stick this into there and spin it around, and what these 45-degree angles are going to do is they're actually going to form your cutting edges on your hole cutter. Okay, so I'll show you that right now. Just check up your cut piece of tubing in the vise. Don't go too tight here, okay? What'll happen is the vise can generate quite a bit of force, and it'll actually turn your tubing into a pancake, okay? So check it up relatively snug, you know, so it's not moving around the place, and then put this in your drill. Because, you know, your first one is not going to turn out well, but you're going to get better at it. Actually, before I forget, I'm going to put a container down just to catch any hot chips coming off this thing. That'll do. So, as best as you can, start drilling. And of course, if it starts to move, tighten it up again. And occasionally you just want to inspect it. and you can just see the cutting edges starting to form. Carefully have a little bit of a feel and see if you're getting there. If you go too deep, you'll actually start pushing the metal outwards and it won't cut as well. Okay, nice and sharp. And what's nice is you can take it out of the vise and do the other side and get a double-sided hole cutter. So after a bit of tweaking, we can test it out and see how well it cuts. Again, your first one isn't going to be perfect. Maybe you'll go too far and start pushing the metal out, but even if it's not perfect, they still cut a real nice hole of tissue. So we've made spread sticks, we've made inoculating loops, we've made hole cutters, and the nice thing about them is they're all made of chemical resistant materials. So what we can do is we can treat these and decontaminate these pretty harshly to get rid of essentially any traces of DNA, RNA, proteins, bacteria. We're essentially going to wipe these completely clean down to the metal, okay? And what you're going to want to do, first of all, make sure that you make them short enough to fit into, I would say, a medium-sized HDPE plastic chemical-resistant container. Okay, this one's from some old Triptone, but you need something relatively sturdy to hold your stuff. And essentially what we're going to do is just going to toss it in there. So let's say you're in the flow hood, you've spread a plate. After you're done with it, just chuck it in there. Done inoculating your culture, chuck it in there. Done cutting your leaf disc? Okay, don't throw it on the floor, chuck it in there. Chuck that in there, throw the rest of this stuff. You get the idea. Welcome to the disgusting sink where we decontaminate our bacteria. So, take your various stainless and titanium implements and throw in, man, this is hard to do behind a camera, throw in whatever sort of decontaminating solution we use. Obviously I make my own, but you can even just throw in straight bleach and soap in there, okay? Just pour that in. And I'm going to add a little bit of distilled water to here. Put the cap on it. And shake it. Now, open the lid a little bit, just to vent it, and let that sit for 15 minutes. Now, after 15 minutes, start the tap and get rid of your decontamination solution. Carefully, don't throw your clean stuff in the sink now. Now what you're going to want to do is rinse this a few times with tap water and then once or twice with distilled water. Once you rinse them with distilled water, just dump it out onto some paper towel. And you can either let them dry or you can package them up immediately. Since we're going to bake them, the water is not really going to affect anything. Make some of these foil pouches, or if you're going to autoclave, get your autoclaving pouches, whatever you're going to use, and just, and just package them up in batches of, let's say, 10 or something like that. So 10 loops per bag. Here are the loops in my little home, and we're just gonna wrap them up nice and tight, like a burrito. Tie the ends. And then it's helpful to show where exactly the loop portion is, so that we know which end to open more carefully. And obviously do the same for the spread sticks. Okay, so after you have your pouches of inoculating loops and your spread sticks, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get the cheapest toaster oven that you possibly can, okay? Don't put any autoclave tape on these. These are just fine as they are. So take them, throw them in. Set the temperature to the highest it'll go. So on this unit it's toast, which I've tested to be about 210, 220 degrees C. Just put whatever settings will give you the highest temperature, okay? And then put the actual timer to stay on. And after you've plugged it in, the toaster oven should turn on, and you're going to want to bake your spread sticks and your inoculating loops and any sort of stainless equipment in there for 2 hours at 200 degrees C. And that's just going to give you absolute peace of mind that after the decontamination, baking at 200 degrees C for 2 hours will absolutely kill anything that was left, which again is also unlikely. So now you'll have peace of mind when you're using these that they'll be just as good as the store-bought stuff. And once you bake them and let them cool down, just throw them into some sort of container and use away. And as soon as you've used one, you put it in the decontamination container, and the circle of life continues. So again, not every system that I implement ends up being useful or saves me time or money, but not only has this saved me time and money, but it's also been adopted by other people in the lab. It's very easy to grab a container, to grab a couple of pouches of spread sticks or whatever you need, use them, throw them in the decon bucket, and at your leisure, decontaminate and bake them. They can sit in the decon solution for a long time, and then you can also bake them for as long as you want. And then, you can reuse the pouches a few times. It's a pretty efficient system, and we use it every day. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Hopefully it wasn't too long. And it's just one of those projects that you can do. If you're the type of person that likes making things with your hand that you can then use, this is the perfect project for you. So I hope everyone has a nice day, and make sure you take care of yourselves, okay?